Mrs. Patterson, there's someone in your house. The words hit me like a slap. I gripped the phone tighter, sure I'd misheard the cleaning lady. I'm sorry. What did you say? There's a woman living in your attic. She's been hiding up there. Maria from Sunshine Cleaning Services sounded shaken. You told me the house would be empty today. You said nobody would be home. My legs went weak. I sank into Stephen's leather chair, the one he never let anyone else sit in. That's impossible. The attic is sealed off. My husband said it was structurally dangerous. Ma'am, she's very thin, very scared. When I found her, she begged me not to tell your husband. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. She says her name is Marina. Isn't that your maiden name? The phone nearly slipped from my trembling hand. Marina. My sister, who had vanished without a trace 30 years ago, leaving behind only police reports that went nowhere, and a family that eventually stopped asking questions. Mom, are you still there? I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I was staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd lived under for 23 years of marriage, never knowing what secrets Stephen had been keeping just inches above my head. Thank you, I managed to whisper, and hung up. I sat there in Stephen's forbidden chair, in the house where I'd been the perfect wife for over 2 decades, and realized everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. If you've ever felt like something was wrong in your own home, like there were secrets hiding in plain sight, you're not alone. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you at home right now? In your kitchen? Your car? Or maybe walking somewhere safe? Please let me know in the comments where this story finds you. If you've ever felt like something was wrong in your own home, like there were secrets hiding in plain sight, you're not alone. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you at home right now, in your kitchen, your car, or maybe walking somewhere safe? Please let me know in the comments where this story finds you, because what I'm about to tell you happened in a house just like yours, in a neighborhood where people wave to each other and trim their hedges on weekends. I met Stephen Patterson in 1989, when I was 28 and working at the local library. He was charming, well-read, and paid attention to me in a way that felt like sunlight after years of being invisible. When he proposed after 6 months, I said yes, without hesitation. I thought I'd won the lottery. Our marriage looked perfect from the outside. Stephen was considerate. He always opened car doors, brought me flowers on Fridays, remembered anniversary dates. But there were rules, small ones at first. He preferred I didn't work late at the library. He thought my friend Jennifer was too gossipy, and maybe I should see less of her. He had very specific ideas about how the house should be maintained. I just want to take care of you, Emily, he'd say when I questioned why he needed to approve my grocery choices or why he kept track of my car's mileage. The world is dangerous. I know better than you do about these things. By our 3rd year of marriage, I'd quit my job to focus on being a proper wife. Stephen said my salary wasn't worth the stress it caused me, though I couldn't remember being stressed about work. My friends slowly faded away, not dramatically, just through a series of cancelled plans and unreturned calls that felt easier than explaining why Stephen always seemed uncomfortable when they visited. The house became my world. Stephen controlled every detail of it, from the thermostat settings to which rooms I was allowed to redecorate. The basement was his office space, off limits because of his important writing. The attic was dangerous, he said, with weak floorboards that could collapse. I was never to go up there. Trust me on this, Emily. I've checked the structural integrity. It's not safe for anyone. I trusted him. I trusted him about everything. It was during those early years that Marina disappeared. Marina was my older sister by 4 years, the bold one who'd moved to the city to pursue her writing career while I stayed home. She had this way of filling up a room just by walking into it, all wild curls and passionate opinions about books and politics. Stephen said she made him nervous with all her radical ideas and her habit of asking pointed questions about our marriage. "Why does he answer for you when people ask you direct questions?" she'd demanded during one of her last visits. And why haven't I seen any of your friends lately? I'd made excuses. Stephen wasn't controlling. He was protective. My friends were busy with their own lives. Marina just didn't understand what a good marriage looked like. 2 weeks later, she vanished. The police said she had packed a suitcase and left her apartment voluntarily. Her landlord confirmed she'd given proper notice. There was no sign of foul play, no evidence of anything, except a 30-year-old woman deciding to start over somewhere new. Adults had the right to disappear, they told our frantic parents. Sometimes people just needed to walk away from their old lives. But Marina would never have left without saying goodbye to our mother. Never. She called Mum every Sunday without fail, had done so since moving out at 18. She'll come back, Stephen assured me as I sobbed into his shoulder. Maybe she just needed space to figure things out. You said yourself she was acting erratic lately. Had I said that? I couldn't remember. Grief made everything fuzzy. Months passed, then years. Our parents hired a private investigator who found nothing. Eventually, even they stopped hoping. Marina became the sister who'd chosen to disappear, the family mystery we learned not to talk about because it hurt too much. Stephen's writing career took off around that time. For years, he'd been struggling to get his work published. Agents would request his manuscripts, but never follow through. Then, suddenly, everything changed. His first novel, Voices in the Silence, was accepted by a major publisher within months of Marina's disappearance. It's like I found my voice, Stephen told the local newspaper reporter who interviewed him about his success. My muse returned. The book was brilliant, lyrical, haunting, with a female narrator whose voice felt achingly familiar. It won awards. Stephen quit his day job to write full-time, and suddenly we had money for renovations, for nicer furniture, for the kind of life I'd dreamed about when we first married. More books followed. Stephen became the literary darling of our small town, invited to speak at libraries and book clubs. People would stop us at the grocery store to gush about his latest novel, how his female characters felt so real, so authentic. "You're so lucky," they'd tell me. "Living with such a talented writer must be inspiring." I'd smile and nod, but something about Stephen's success always felt strange to me. His writing style had changed so dramatically after Marina disappeared. Before, his stories had been dark, cynical, very much in a male voice. After, they were emotionally rich, full of the kind of feminine insight that had always been Marina's strength. When I mentioned this to Stephen, he got defensive. Writers evolve, Emily. I studied my craft. I learned to write from different perspectives. He started spending more time in his basement office, claiming he needed absolute quiet to work. Sometimes I'd hear him pacing up there late at night, muttering to himself. When I asked about it, he said he was working through dialogue, that all writers talk to themselves. "The creative process is mysterious," he'd say. "You wouldn't understand." Gradually, I stopped asking questions. Stephen made it clear that his writing was sacred territory, not to be disturbed or discussed. I learned to tiptoe around the house when he was working, to have dinner ready when he emerged from his basement cave, to pretend I didn't notice how he'd become secretive about his manuscripts, never letting me read them until they were already published. The years blurred together. Stephen's books kept coming, one every 18 months like clockwork, and our life became more isolated. He convinced me we didn't need many friends because we had each other. He discouraged me from getting a job because my writing brings in enough money and I need you available to support my career. I became Stephen's wife and nothing else. I organized his schedule, answered his fan mail, managed the household while he created his art. People in town knew me as Stephen Patterson's wife, supportive, quiet, lucky to be married to such a successful man. I'd become a stranger to everyone except Stephen, including myself. I sat in Stephen's chair for 20 minutes, staring at my phone. Maria's number was still in my recent calls. Stephen wouldn't be back from his book signing in Portland until evening. I had maybe 6 hours before I'd have to pretend this conversation never happened. I called her back. "Mrs. Patterson? I was hoping you'd call. I didn't know what to do. Tell me exactly what you saw. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I was cleaning the main floor when I heard footsteps upstairs. Soft ones, like someone trying not to be heard. I called out, thinking maybe you'd come home early. Maria paused. That's when I heard crying. My grip tightened on the phone. Crying? I followed the sound to a door in the hallway ceiling. There's a pull-down ladder. It wasn't sealed off like you said. When I climbed up, she took a shaky breath. Mrs. Patterson, there's a whole living space up there. Bed, desk, bookshelves. And this woman, so thin I could see her bones through her clothes. What did she say? She knew things about your family. Your mother's maiden name was Henderson. You had a cat named Whiskers when you were 12. She said she'd been watching you through the heating vents for years, learning about your life. Maria's voice dropped. She begged me not to tell your husband, said he'd hurt you if he knew she talked to anyone. The room spun around me. Those weren't things a stranger would know. Those were details only Marina would remember. Is she still there? I don't know. I left right after she asked me to call you. Mrs. Patterson, I think you should call the police. I can't. Not yet. I need to understand what's happening first. After I hung up, I stood at the bottom of the main staircase, looking up toward the hallway where Maria said she'd found the attic entrance. In 23 years of living in this house, I'd never noticed a ceiling access panel. Stephen had always steered me away from that end of the hall, saying the guest bathroom plumbing made noise, and he didn't want me disturbed by it when he was working. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway looked exactly as it always had, until I stopped and really looked up. There, almost hidden in the shadow between two light fixtures, was a rectangular outline in the ceiling. A handle so small you'd miss it unless you knew to look for it. I dragged a chair from the guest bedroom and climbed up. The panel opened easily, too easily for something that had supposedly been sealed for decades. The ladder unfolded smoothly, without the creaks or resistance you'd expect from unused hardware. My hands shook as I climbed up into the darkness. A small window at the far end let in just enough light to see by. Maria was right. This wasn't just storage space. Someone had been living here. The floor was covered with a thin rug. A narrow bed was pushed against one wall, neatly made with faded quilts. Built-in bookshelves lined another wall, packed with books I recognized. The complete works of Virginia Woolf, Jane Austen, the poetry collections Marina had loved in college. On a small desk sat a stack of notebooks and loose papers covered in handwriting. I picked up the top sheet with trembling fingers. It wasn't Stephen's handwriting. I'd seen Stephen's scrawled masculine script thousands of times over the years. This was different, smaller, more careful, distinctly feminine. The same handwriting I remembered from Marina's college letters home, from birthday cards and Christmas thank you notes before she disappeared. I flipped through page after page of what looked like novel drafts, character sketches, dialogue experiments. The writing style, the voice, the emotional depth. It was identical to what had made Stephen's books so successful. Stephen hadn't written those award-winning novels. Marina had. Near the bed, I found a plastic container with fresh food, crackers, canned soup, bottles of water. Someone had been bringing supplies up here recently. Very recently. I heard Stephen's car in the driveway. Panic shot through me as I scrambled down the ladder, folded it up and replaced the ceiling panel. I shoved the chair back into the guest room and raced downstairs, making it to the kitchen just as Stephen's key turned in the front door. Emily, I'm home early. The reading was cancelled. The author got food poisoning. I was standing at the sink, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles were white, trying to look normal. That's too bad. How was the drive? Stephen walked into the kitchen, and I studied his face the way I'd never allowed myself to before. Had he always looked this controlled, this watchful? Had I been so trained to see him as caring and protective that I'd missed the calculation in his eyes? Fine. Quiet. He moved to the refrigerator, casual as always. How was your day? I hope that cleaning service worked out well. Yes, they did a good job. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears. Stephen pulled out a beer and popped it open, watching me over the bottle as he drank. Did they clean the whole house? Even the upper floors? There was something in his tone, something testing. Just the main areas, living room, kitchen, bathrooms. I forced myself to meet his eyes. They said some parts of the house seemed off limits. Stephen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Off limits how? The basement, obviously. And they mentioned something about an attic access, but I told them what you always told me, that it's sealed off and dangerous. Good. Stephen relaxed against the counter. Some parts of this house are mine alone, Emily. They always have been. I trust you remember that. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. I nodded and turned back to the sink, afraid he'd see the knowledge burning in my eyes. For 30 years, Stephen had been keeping my sister prisoner in our attic, stealing her words, her talent, her very existence, and I'd been living below her the entire time, completely blind to her suffering. Some parts of this house are mine alone. As I stood there washing dishes that didn't need washing, I realized Stephen wasn't just talking about physical spaces. He was talking about secrets. That night, I lay awake listening to Stephen's breathing beside me. He slept the deep, untroubled sleep of a man with no conscience. Every few minutes I found myself looking up at the ceiling, wondering if Marina was awake too, just a few feet above my head. I waited until Stephen's breathing settled into the rhythm that meant he was fully asleep, then slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to his desk. He kept his schedule in a leather planner, old-fashioned, but thorough. Stephen was nothing if not organized about his public appearances. Next Tuesday, he had a speaking engagement at Portland State University. Contemporary voice in literary fiction. The event was scheduled to start at 7 p.m., with a reception afterward. He'd be gone for at least 6 hours, maybe 8, if the networking ran late like it usually did. I photographed the schedule page with my phone and crept back upstairs. 6 hours. It would have to be enough. Over the next few days, I began planning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Stephen had trained me to be passive, to defer to his judgment, but that training worked both ways. He never questioned what I did during the day because he'd conditioned me to be predictable. I ran errands, cleaned, prepared meals. Boring, domestic, invisible. Perfect cover for what I needed to do. On Monday morning, while Stephen worked in his basement office, I drove to the public library, the same library where I'd worked 30 years ago, before Stephen convinced me to quit. The head librarian, Mrs. Chen, still remembered me. "Emily Patterson, what a pleasant surprise. How's Stephen's writing going?" "Very well, thank you." I'd perfected the proud wife smile years ago. "I'm actually doing some research for him. He's working on a novel that involves a missing person case, and he wants the procedural details to be accurate." Mrs. Chen led me to the computer terminals. "You'll want to start with the newspaper archives. We have everything digitized back to 1985. I searched for Marina's name and found what I was looking for. 3 articles about her disappearance from October 1993. The first was just a basic missing person report. The second, published a week later, mentioned that police had interviewed family members and friends. The third article, from a month after she vanished, stated that the investigation was being scaled back due to lack of evidence of foul play, but it was the details in the second article that made my hands shake as I read. Stephen Patterson, brother-in-law to the missing woman, was among the last people to see Marina Henderson. Patterson stated that Henderson had seemed unstable and unhappy during her final visit to his home, and that she had expressed interest in starting over somewhere new. Police found no evidence of suspicious circumstances. Stephen had lied to the police. Marina had never talked about starting over. She'd been excited about her writing, about a novel she was working on that she thought might finally get her published. She'd been full of hope and energy the last time I saw her, not unstable and unhappy. I printed the articles and tucked them into my purse, my mind racing. If Stephen had lied about Marina's state of mind, what else had he lied about? And if he was keeping her prisoner, if he was stealing her work, then this wasn't just kidnapping. This was a crime that had been going on for 30 years, hiding in plain sight in our suburban neighborhood. I needed legal advice, but I couldn't use our family attorney. Stephen had chosen him, controlled that relationship like he controlled everything else in our lives. I needed someone who would be loyal to me, not to my husband. That afternoon, I called Hartwell and Associates, a law firm on the other side of town that specialized in family law and criminal defense. I told them I needed a consultation about a hypothetical situation for a book Stephen was writing. Margaret Hartwell agreed to see me the next morning. Her office was nothing like our family lawyer's mahogany and leather setup. It was bright, modern, with family photos on the desk and degrees from state universities instead of Ivy League schools. Margaret Hartwell looked like someone who'd worked for everything she had. "Mrs. Patterson, how can I help you today?" I'd rehearsed this conversation. "I need to understand the legal implications of a situation. For my husband's novel," I added quickly. "He writes crime fiction." "Of course. What's the scenario?" "If someone was being held against their will, in their family member's home, for an extended period, what would the charges be?" Margaret leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "How extended?" "Hypothetically. Decades. That would be kidnapping in the first degree, unlawful imprisonment, possibly human trafficking depending on whether the person was being forced to work." Margaret's voice grew serious. "Mrs. Patterson, these are federal crimes we're talking about. If someone had evidence of this kind of situation, they'd need to contact law enforcement immediately." "What kind of evidence would be needed?" "Physical evidence of confinement, medical records showing malnutrition or abuse, witness statements, documentation of the victim's attempts to escape or call for help." Margaret studied my face. "Are we really talking about fiction here?" I met her eyes steadily. "What would happen to someone who reported this kind of crime? Would they be protected?" "Absolutely. There are victim protection programs, safe houses. No one would be forced to return to a dangerous situation." Margaret reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "Mrs. Patterson, if you or someone you know needs help, there are resources available. This is my direct line." I took the card, my fingers closing around it like a lifeline. "Thank you. This has been very educational. One more thing." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "If someone in this hypothetical situation has been forced to work, to create things of value that were then sold or published by their captor, that person would be entitled to compensation, full compensation, plus damages for the years of stolen labor." My heart pounded as I drove home. Stephen's entire literary career, his reputation, our financial security, it was all built on 30 years of stolen work, Marina's work. If this went public, if the truth came out, Stephen wouldn't just lose his freedom, he'd lose everything. And so would I. But as I pulled into our driveway and looked up at the second-story window where Marina was hidden, I realized I didn't care. Some things were more important than security. Some truths were worth losing everything to expose. I had a plan now. Tomorrow night, when Stephen left for Portland, I would document everything. I would gather proof. And then I would call Margaret Hartwell's direct line and end 30 years of lies. The hard part would be surviving until tomorrow night, without Stephen suspecting anything. I walked into our house, past Stephen's basement office, where he was probably working on another stolen manuscript, and began preparing dinner like the good wife I'd always been. Just one more day. Marina had waited 30 years. She could wait one more day. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of autumn rain that makes everything feel hushed and secretive. Stephen adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, checking his appearance one final time before his Portland lecture. "The GPS says it's a 2-hour drive with this weather," he said, kissing my cheek with the same perfunctory affection he'd shown for years. I'll probably stay for the reception afterwards, so don't wait up. Drive safely. I handed him his travel coffee mug, playing the role of concerned wife one last time. Call me when you arrive. Of course. I watched from the window as his tail lights disappeared into the grey evening, then waited another 20 minutes before I moved. Stephen was paranoid about forgetting things. He'd driven back home twice in the past year for his reading glasses or forgotten papers. But once he'd been gone for 30 minutes, he never returned. The house felt different when I was alone in it now. Not peaceful the way it used to. Now it felt like it was holding its breath, keeping secrets that were too big for its walls. I gathered what I needed. My phone with its camera, a small flashlight, the business card Margaret Hartwell had given me, and a bottle of water. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set everything down twice to steady myself. Upstairs, I pulled down the attic ladder with more confidence this time. The rungs felt solid under my feet as I climbed up into the darkness. Hello? I called softly. It's Marina? My name is Emily. I'm your sister. Silence. Then a rustling sound from the far corner of the attic. Please don't be afraid. Stephen is gone. He won't be back for hours. A voice emerged from the shadows, so quiet I almost missed it. Emily? My breath caught. It was Marina's voice, but changed. Older, hoarser, like someone who didn't speak aloud very often. It's me. It's really me. A figure moved slowly into the dim light from the small window. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. The woman who approached me was barely recognizable as my sister. Marina had always been petite, but now she was skeletal. Her dark hair, once wild and curly, hung lank and grey around her shoulders. Her eyes, though, her eyes were still Marina's, still bright with intelligence despite everything. You're not supposed to be here, she whispered, glancing nervously toward the ladder. He'll hurt you if he finds out. Stephen's gone to Portland. We have time. I moved closer, wanting to embrace her but afraid she might break. Marina, my God, what has he done to you? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. What hasn't he done? She gestured around the makeshift living space. This has been my world for 30 years, Em. This room, these books, this little window where I can watch the neighbors live their lives. I looked around with new eyes, seeing the details I'd missed during my first frantic visit. The walls were covered with her handwriting, notes, story ideas, fragments of dialogue. Dozens of notebooks were stacked on homemade shelves. Near the bed was a small camping stove and a collection of canned goods. He brings you food? When he remembers. When I've been productive enough to earn it. Marina's voice was matter of fact, as if she was discussing the weather. Some days I get 3 meals. Some days I get none. It depends on how many pages I write. The manuscripts downstairs, they're yours. All of Stephen's books are yours. Every word. Marina moved to her desk and picked up a notebook. This is my latest. A story about a woman who disappears from her own life and learns to live like a ghost. Stephen thinks it's his best work yet. I felt sick. Marina, why didn't you try to escape? In 30 years, there must have been opportunities. Her laugh was bitter. Escape to where? He told everyone I left voluntarily. He has police reports saying I was unstable, that I wanted to start over. Who would believe a crazy woman who claims she's been held prisoner by the respected local author? She sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. Besides, he made sure I understood the cost of trying to leave. What do you mean? Marina was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. The night he brought me here, he told me about the accident. What accident? October 15th, 1993. The night I supposedly disappeared. Marina's eyes met mine. I was driving home from dinner with you and Stephen. Do you remember? We'd had that argument about whether I should stay in town or move to New York for my writing career. I did remember. It had been a tense evening. Stephen had been unusually argumentative, picking apart every one of Marina's dreams with surgical precision. I tried to mediate, but Marina had left angry. Stephen followed me, Marina continued. He said he wanted to apologize, to convince me to stay in town. He offered to give me a ride since it was raining and my car was making that weird noise. My stomach clenched. Marina's old Honda had been acting up for weeks. We were driving down Maple Street when he started talking about how I was being selfish, how my success would overshadow his writing, how I needed to think about family loyalty. Marina's voice grew distant. I told him he was being ridiculous. That's when he swerved into the oncoming lane. Oh, God. There was a couple coming the other way. The Hendersons. They were in their 70s, coming home from dinner at their daughter's house. Tears started flowing down Marina's face. Stephen yanked the wheel back at the last second. We missed them, but they overcorrected trying to avoid us. Their car went off the road and hit a tree. I felt the blood drain from my face. They died. Mr. Henderson died instantly. His wife lasted 3 days in the hospital. Marina's voice broke. Stephen said it was my fault, that if I hadn't been arguing with him, if I hadn't been so selfish about my career, he never would have gotten distracted. He said if I ever told anyone what really happened, he'd make sure everyone knew I was the one driving that night. But that's insane. You weren't driving. I know that. You know that. But Stephen had it all worked out. He'd already told the responding officers that I was too upset to give a coherent statement. He handled everything. The insurance, the reports, the follow-up. By the time I understood what he was planning, he had me so turned around I didn't know what was real anymore. Marina stood and walked to a cardboard box near the desk. She pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. He brought me here that night. Said I could choose between taking responsibility for 2 deaths or disappearing quietly and letting him handle everything. He had a suicide note ready in my handwriting. He'd been practicing my signature for months, apparently. Said he'd found it in my apartment, along with evidence that I'd been planning to kill myself over my failed writing career. She handed me the folder. Inside were photocopies of police reports, insurance documents, newspaper clippings about the accident. All of them painted Stephen as the hero who'd tried to save me from my own self-destructive behavior. He told everyone I'd run away after the accident because I couldn't handle the guilt. Said I'd been drinking that night and blamed myself for distracting him. Marina's voice was hollow. The truth was right there in the reports, but he spun it perfectly. Poor Stephen trying to help his unstable sister-in-law who'd tragically disappeared after causing such horror. I stared at the documents, my mind struggling to process the full scope of Stephen's manipulation. 30 years, I whispered. He's kept you prisoner for 30 years because of something he did. And he's made a career out of it. My words, my ideas, my talent. He's stolen all of it and become famous while I waste away in this attic. Marina's eyes hardened. Do you know what the worst part is, Em? What? I could have forgiven him for the accident. It was a moment of anger, a stupid mistake that spiraled out of control. People die in car accidents every day. She gestured around the cramped room. But this deliberate, calculated cruelty, day after day, year after year, this is who Stephen really is. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. At the grey pallor of her skin, the way her clothes hung loose on her frame, the careful way she moved as if conserving energy. Stephen hadn't just stolen her words. He'd stolen her life, her health, her very existence. Marina, I'm getting you out of here tonight. You can't. He'll know you found me. He'll hurt you. I don't care what he does to me. I pulled out Margaret Hartwell's business card. I have help. Legal help. People who can protect us both. For the first time since I'd climbed into the attic, Marina's expression showed something other than resignation. Hope. He's kept records. Documentation of everything he's made me write. Bank statements showing the money from my books. He thinks I don't know, but I've seen the files. She pointed toward a loose floorboard near the window. Insurance, in case I ever tried to expose him. But it works both ways. What do you mean? Marina smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. He's been so careful to document his theft that he's actually created a perfect evidence trail. Every contract, every payment, every published word that should have had my name on it. I knelt by the floorboard she'd indicated. Underneath was a small waterproof container holding dozens of photographs, pictures Marina had taken through the heating vents of Stephen in his office, working with her manuscripts, signing contracts, depositing checks. "I've been documenting everything for years," Marina said quietly, waiting for the right moment. I looked at my sister, this woman who'd survived 3 decades of imprisonment and somehow maintained the presence of mind to gather evidence against her captor. The right moment just arrived. I helped Marina gather the most crucial evidence, the photographs, key manuscripts in her handwriting, and bank documents Stephen had been careless enough to leave where she could see them. My hands shook as I stuffed everything into a canvas bag. "I need to call the police now before Stephen gets back," I said, checking my watch. He'd been gone for 2 hours. "But I can't do it from the house phone. He monitors the call logs." Marina nodded, her face pale but determined. "There's a gas station 3 blocks down on Elm Street. The owner, Mr. Kim, he's seen me in this window sometimes when he's walking his dog. I think he always wondered." I climbed down from the attic, my mind racing. Every few seconds I expected to hear Stephen's car in the driveway, to feel his hands grabbing me from behind. But the house remained silent. I drove to Kim's mobile station, with the evidence bag clutched in my passenger seat like a lifeline. Mr. Kim, a gentleman in his 60s, looked concerned when I stumbled through his front door, clearly shaken. "Mrs. Patterson, are you all right? I need to use your phone. It's an emergency, but I can't explain right now." He handed me the cordless phone without question, and I dialed Margaret Hartwell's direct line. "Margaret, it's Emily Patterson. I need help. Now." "Emily, what's wrong? You sound terrified." "The hypothetical situation we discussed? It's not hypothetical." My voice cracked. "My sister has been held prisoner in my attic for 30 years. My husband has been stealing her work and publishing it as his own. I have evidence." Silence on the other end. Then, "Where are you now?" "A gas station on Elm Street. I can't go home. He's due back any moment. I'm calling 911 right now and giving them your location. Don't move. Don't go anywhere alone. The police will be there in 5 minutes." True to her word, I heard sirens almost immediately. 2 patrol cars pulled into the gas station lot, followed by an unmarked detective's vehicle. I recognized Detective Sarah Walsh from the local newspaper's crime reports. She'd been working cases in our town for over a decade. "Mrs. Patterson? I'm Detective Walsh. I understand you have information about an ongoing crime." Standing there under the harsh fluorescent lights of Kim's gas station, with the rain still falling outside, I told the story that had been buried for 30 years. I showed them the photographs Marina had taken, the manuscripts in her handwriting, the evidence of Stephen's systematic theft. Detective Walsh's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. "Mrs. Patterson, this is federal kidnapping, human trafficking, and fraud. We need to get your sister out of that house immediately." She radioed for backup units and an ambulance. "Can you get us inside without alerting your husband?" "He's at a lecture in Portland, but he could be back any time." "Then we move now." The convoy of police vehicles followed me back to my house. The same house where I'd lived as Stephen's obedient wife for 23 years, never knowing my sister was suffering directly above my head. Now it looked different in the red and blue lights of the patrol cars. Smaller, more sinister, like a dollhouse hiding dark secrets. I led Detective Walsh and 2 officers upstairs to the attic access. "Marina?" I called up. "It's Emily. I have help with me. Police officers?" Marina's voice drifted down, cautious but hopeful. "Emily? It's safe. Stephen is still gone. These people are here to help you." Detective Walsh climbed up first. I heard her sharp intake of breath as she saw Marina's living conditions. Then her voice, gentle and professional. "Marina Henderson? I'm Detective Walsh. We're going to get you out of here and to a hospital. You're safe now. It took 3 officers to help Marina down the ladder. She was too weak to climb down on her own. When I saw her in the bright hallway lights, my heart nearly stopped. She was even more fragile than she'd appeared in the dim attic. Her wrists were barely thicker than my thumbs. The EMTs were waiting with a stretcher. As they checked Marina's vital signs, I could see them exchanging concerned looks. One of them started an IV immediately. "How long since you've had a medical exam?" the lead EMT asked Marina. 30 years, she whispered. Detective Walsh was photographing everything. The attic space, the manuscripts, the evidence of long-term habitation. She held up one of Stephen's published novels next to a handwritten manuscript in Marina's script. "The handwriting analysis alone will be enough for the fraud charges," she muttered. "But this level of imprisonment, Mrs. Patterson, your husband is looking at life in prison." That's when we heard the car in the driveway. Stephen was home early. Through the front window, I could see him getting out of his sedan, moving with his usual confident stride toward the front door. He had no idea his entire world was about to collapse. "Everyone stay calm," Detective Walsh instructed. "Let him come inside. We want this clean." I heard Stephen's key in the lock, heard him call out his usual greeting. "Emily, I'm back. The traffic was better than expected." His footsteps approached the bottom of the stairs, then stopped. "Emily, why are there police cars outside?" Detective Walsh nodded to her officers. They moved quickly but quietly down the stairs. I heard Stephen's voice change from confusion to alarm. "What's going on? Emily? Emily? Stephen Patterson?" Detective Walsh's voice carried up from the entryway. "I'm Detective Walsh with the county sheriff's office. I need you to put your hands where I can see them." "I don't understand. What's this about?" "Emily." "Sir, you're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and human trafficking." The sounds that followed will stay with me forever. Stephen's voice rising from confusion to indignation to panic as the charges were read, the click of handcuffs, his demands to know where I was, his insistence that this was all a mistake. "Emily! Emily, whatever they're telling you, it's not true! Emily!" I stayed upstairs with Marina as the EMTs prepared to transport her to the hospital. Through the window, I watched my husband of 23 years being led away in handcuffs, still calling my name like I was the one betraying him. "It's over," Marina whispered from the stretcher. "It's really over." But looking down at my sister's ravaged face, at the woman who'd lost 30 years of her life to Stephen's cruelty, I knew it wasn't over. Not really. Stephen's arrest was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward justice. Detective Walsh approached us with a notepad. "Marina, I know you're exhausted, but I need to ask, are there other victims? Anyone else Stephen might have hurt?" Marina's eyes met mine. "No other victims. But detective, there's something else you need to know." "What's that?" "The car accident in 1993, the Hendersons. Stephen caused that crash deliberately, then used it to threaten me into silence." Marina's voice grew stronger. "I have documentation of his confession. Photos of evidence he kept. He's been blackmailing himself for 30 years and didn't even realize it." Detective Walsh's eyes widened. "That case was closed as an accident." "Because Stephen made sure it was." Marina smiled grimly. "But I've been keeping records too. Everything he told me, everything he did. I wrote it all down. Every year, every month, every crime." As the ambulance pulled away with Marina inside, I realized that Stephen's literary career had taught him to be meticulous about documentation. He'd kept careful records of everything, including his own crimes. He'd written the evidence for his own downfall. The irony would have been funny if it weren't built on 30 years of my sister's suffering. Standing in front of my house as crime scene tape was strung across the front door, watching the neighbours gather to whisper about the shocking arrest of their celebrated local author, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Relief. And for the first time in 30 years, I knew exactly where my sister was. She was free. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and a kind of surreal disbelief that this was actually my life. Stephen was being held without bail at the county detention centre, charged with kidnapping in the first degree, unlawful imprisonment, human trafficking for forced labour, mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The prosecutor had added charges related to the 1993 car accident after reviewing Marina's documentation, vehicular manslaughter, and evidence tampering. Margaret Hartwell had taken on my divorce case pro bono, she said, because this kind of systematic abuse deserves justice on every level. I sat in her office on a grey November morning, signing papers that would dissolve 23 years of marriage to a man I'd never really known. The good news is that Oregon is an equitable distribution state, Margaret explained, sliding another document across her desk. Normally, marital assets would be split fairly between spouses, but in cases involving criminal activity. Everything Stephen earned came from Marina's stolen work, I finished. The house, the savings accounts, the book royalties. Exactly. The court will likely award the majority of assets to Marina as compensation for 30 years of stolen intellectual property and unpaid labour. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Emily, you understand that you may end up with very little financially. I thought about Marina, still hospitalized while doctors tried to address decades of malnutrition and neglect. She'd lost 60 pounds from her already small frame. Her bone density was that of a 90-year-old woman. The psychological evaluation had diagnosed severe PTSD, depression, and agoraphobia. I don't want anything that came from her suffering, I said firmly. Whatever the court decides Marina deserves, I'll support it completely. Margaret smiled. That's what I hoped you'd say. There's something else, though. Stephen's publisher wants to meet with you. Whitmore and Associates had been Stephen's publisher for 15 years. They'd made millions from his novels, Marina's novels. Now they were facing potential lawsuits from readers, bookstores, and literary organizations. Their reputation was in shambles. I met with Jonathan Whitmore himself in his Manhattan office the following week. He was a thin, nervous man who kept adjusting his glasses and apologizing. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to understand that we had no knowledge of Mr. Patterson's situation. No knowledge at all. I believe you, I said. Stephen was very good at maintaining facades. We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement to your sister. Full royalties for all published works, plus punitive damages. We're also establishing a fund for other victims of literary fraud. He slid a check across his desk. This is just the beginning. An advance on what Miss Henderson is owed. The amount made my head spin. More money than Stephen and I had seen in our entire marriage combined. There's one more thing, Whitmore continued. We'd like to republish all the novels under your sister's name, her real name, give her the recognition she deserves. When I returned home, though I wasn't sure I could call it home anymore, the media circus was in full swing. News vans lined our street. Reporters shouted questions as I walked from my car to the front door. The house that had once been my prison was now a crime scene, sealed off with yellow tape. But somehow I was still trapped inside the story. Mrs. Patterson, did you know your husband was keeping your sister prisoner? How does it feel to discover your marriage was built on a lie? Will you be writing a book about your experience? That last question followed me everywhere. Publishers had started calling within days of Stephen's arrest. They wanted my story, Marina's story, the inside details of 30 years of hidden captivity. The offers were substantial, but something about them felt wrong, like they wanted to profit from Marina's suffering all over again. The neighbours were the hardest part. These were people I'd lived next to for over 2 decades, who'd borrowed cups of sugar, who'd signed for packages when I was out, who'd always complimented Stephen's books and told me how lucky I was to be married to such a talented man. Now they looked at me with a mixture of pity, suspicion, and morbid curiosity. Mrs. Chen from next door cornered me at the grocery store one afternoon. Emily, honey, how could you not know? All those years, with her right above your head, how could you not hear something? It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but most were too polite to voice directly. How could I have been so blind, so oblivious? What kind of wife doesn't notice her husband keeping a prisoner in their own home? I don't know, I told Mrs. Chen honestly. I trusted him completely. I never questioned anything he told me because I thought that's what love meant. The local book club, which had hosted Stephen for readings multiple times, issued a public statement distancing themselves from his work. The library where I'd once worked removed his books from display. The literary festival that had featured him as their keynote speaker 3 years running quietly cancelled their upcoming event. Stephen's fall from grace was swift and absolute, but the community's reaction to me was more complicated. Some people saw me as another victim of Stephen's manipulation. They brought casseroles, offered support, told me how brave Marina and I were for exposing the truth. Others whispered that I had to have known, that no one could be that naive, that maybe I'd been complicit in keeping Marina hidden, perhaps even benefiting from her captivity. The whispers hurt more than the direct accusations, because sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, I wondered if they were right. Should I have questioned Stephen's sudden burst of literary talent? Should I have demanded to see the attic he claimed was dangerous? Should I have noticed the extra groceries, the unexplained sounds, the changes in his behavior? But then I'd visit Marina in the hospital, and she'd hold my hand with her painfully thin fingers and tell me, "He fooled everyone, Em. That was his gift, making lies look like truth." The trial was set for the following spring. Stephen's lawyer was already arguing for a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested. This case was too big, too shocking, too clear-cut for plea bargaining. As winter settled over our small town, I found myself living in a world where everything familiar had been turned upside down. The life I'd thought was real had been an elaborate fiction. The man I'd loved had been a monster. The perfect marriage had been a prison for 2 women instead of 1. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. A strange kind of relief. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't tiptoeing around Stephen's moods, managing his schedule, or worrying about his approval. I could eat what I wanted, go where I pleased, speak to whomever I chose. I was learning at 51 what it meant to be free. Even if that freedom came with a price neither Marina nor I should ever have had to pay. 6 months later, Marina came to live with me in the small apartment I'd rented across town. She couldn't handle being in the house where she'd been imprisoned. Even after the court awarded it to her as part of her compensation, she wanted nothing to do with it. We sold it to a developer who planned to tear it down and build something new. I was glad to see it go. Our new routine was simple, peaceful, in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Marina woke early and spent mornings writing in a journal her therapist had recommended, not for publication, just for herself. Real thoughts, real words, finally belonging to her alone. I'd learned to cook again, properly this time, not just Stephen's preferred meals prepared on his schedule. Marina was slowly gaining weight under careful medical supervision. She'd gone from 87 pounds when she was rescued to nearly 110. Still thin, but no longer skeletal. "What are you working on today?" I asked her over breakfast one Tuesday morning. She'd started writing fiction again, tentatively, like someone learning to walk after a long illness. "A story about 2 sisters," Marina said, stirring honey into her tea. "They lose each other for a while, but they find their way back." The media attention had finally died down. Stephen's trial was scheduled for next month, but his lawyer had convinced him to accept a plea deal. Life in prison without parole in exchange for a full confession and cooperation with authorities investigating similar cases. There would be no dramatic courtroom showdown, no opportunity for Stephen to manipulate another audience. Just quiet justice, administered by people who understood that some crimes were too clear-cut for theatrics. Marina had decided not to republish Stephen's novels under her own name. Those stories came from a dark place, she'd told the publisher. I want to write new ones from where I am now. She was working on something entirely different, lighter, more hopeful, though still carrying the wisdom that only comes from surviving something terrible. Some days were harder than others. Marina still flinched at sudden noises, still checked locks multiple times before bed. She couldn't handle crowded spaces or unexpected visitors, but she was healing, day by day, word by word. And so was I. I'd spent 30 years of my life being Stephen's wife, molding myself around his needs, his schedule, his approval. Now, at 51, I was learning who Emily was when she wasn't performing for anyone. Turns out she was stronger than I'd given her credit for. Em? Marina looked up from her notebook. Do you ever regret it? Calling the police that night? Everything that came after? I thought about the question seriously, the way Marina deserved. About the media circus, the financial uncertainty, the whispers and stares that still followed us sometimes. No, I said finally. Not for 1 second. Marina smiled. The real smile I remembered from our childhood before Stephen stole her away from us. Good, she said, because I'm writing our story next, the real one, about the sister who refused to give up. Outside our kitchen window, life continued in its ordinary way. People walked their dogs, children played in the park across the street, neighbors tended their gardens. Normal life, the kind Marina had been forced to watch from an attic window for 30 years. Now she was part of it again. We both were. 1 year later, Marina published her memoir. Not through a major publisher looking to capitalize on our story, but through a small press that specialized in survivor narratives. The book was called Voices in the Silence, reclaiming the title Stephen had stolen from her decades ago. It became a quiet bestseller, not because of the sensational details, but because of Marina's grace in telling a story of survival without bitterness. She donated the proceeds to organizations that help missing persons and abuse survivors. Stephen died in prison 8 months into his sentence. Natural causes. A heart attack. Marina felt nothing when I told her the news. He's been dead to me for 30 years, she said simply. Marina's creativity has slowly returned, different, but still unmistakably hers. She's working on a novel now, her first original work in decades. Sometimes I catch her laughing at something she's written, and I remember the sister I thought I'd lost forever. If you suspect someone you love is hiding something terrible, trust that instinct. Don't let anyone convince you that your concerns are foolish or that you're imagining things. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking doors hide the darkest secrets. And sometimes behind those doors, someone is waiting for you to be brave enough to look. Your voice could be their rescue.